Warning: the Savage Nation contains adult language, adult content, psychological nudity. Listener discretion is advised. And now, America's most exciting radio talk show, The Savage Nation, home of unprotected talk, borders, language, culture. And here he is, Michael Savage.
Of the mind. Today we're going to talk about the infrastructure and the train crash. Welcome to the Savage Nation. Both sides are giving us their doctrinaire views. Immediately the left jumped on it and said that we needed to rebuild the infrastructure, which is true, by the way. Immediately on the right, the knee-jerk conservatives like Rush Limbaugh started to mock those who said we need to rebuild the infrastructure. Now, hold on now. We all know that the crash was caused not by a failure of the infrastructure, but by the engineer who was probably stoned or asleep or something. And by the way, did they drug test the engineer? Did the NTSB insist on a drug test immediately? If not, why not? Well, probably the lawyer didn't let them drug test him. I'm not sure. But irrespective of the cause of this train accident, the U.S. infrastructure is in terrible shape. It's broken. We all know this. We all know the train was speeding, and we know that's the cause of the accident, not a broken rail, not a broken train. So let's be clear about that. But both sides have politicized the train crash. Immediately, Nancy Pelosi, who never met a road project she didn't like, started to say, well, listen to what she had to say, and you'll understand what I'm saying. Nancy Pelosi, please, if you don't mind.
No maintenance is the most expensive maintenance when it comes to maintaining the safety of our infrastructure.
All right,
we saw President Eisenhower at a time of tough economic times.
All right, you got the picture. Right away, she wants road construction for obvious reasons. All roads lead to Rome. Okay, we know that. She wants public works projects for the, let us say, secondary benefits of such. Let's leave it at that. Now, on the other side, you have Rush Limbaugh immediately not thinking, just reacting, screaming that we don't need any infrastructure spending whatsoever. It's unbelievable to me. Listen to Limbaugh in clip one. See if you understand what I'm saying to you.
The political component to this is going to be, and it's predictable as easily as the sun coming up in the morning. We're going to hear that we need to really ramp up infrastructure spending. We're going to hear hand-wringing and complaints. How could this have happened? We are letting our country just dilapidate right in front of our eyes.
Right,
Where
if Rush
is
Limbaugh
all
got
the
out of his bubble,
infrastructure spending?
All right, fine, Rush. I'll try to walk the line on this. If you got out of your bubble, Mr. Limbaugh, and actually looked at the roads, the bridges, the tunnels in America, you'd realize they're in very bad shape. You would realize that the world is not Palm Beach, where the roads are excellent, by the way. Our bridges are falling apart. Our tunnels are leaking. Our roadways are broken because the infrastructure needs a vast revamping. And I want to talk about that because both sides have politicized the issue of the train crash. Knee-jerk conservatives attack liberals who say we need to rebuild the infrastructure. Liberals who like big government say we need more government spending. Is there anyone listening to this program right now, the Savage Nation, who says we do not need our roads, rails, bridges, and tunnels upgraded? I'd like to know where you're coming from. Here in America, we happen to be worse off than several third world nations. Malaysia, for example, has better roads than we do in America. So why do doctrinaire Republican water carriers politicize the train crash? Why do they immediately attack Democrats who call for infrastructure upgrades? They're no better than the liberals in their doctrinaire approach. Again, we know the train crash was not caused by an infrastructure failure, but by a probably stoner engineer, maybe even an attempted suicide by train. We don't know. Sort of like that German plane crash. We don't know what happened here. Or he was on drugs or meds, or he was asleep. God knows. But the point is, common sense dictates that our bridges, tunnels, rails, and are antiquated and falling apart. You may not know this, and you're going to learn about something today, that most of our most beautiful and important bridges, tunnels, dams, and buildings were built in the 1930s, supervised and funded by the United States government. The very bridges and tunnels and highways and dams that even conservatives benefit from were built by the socialist administration of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. You didn't know any of that. You have to understand that there's a place for government. Why are you listening to these morons who make it sound like no government is good? What are they, suddenly anarchists, all of these billionaires with private jets? Now they're anarchists. Half of them worked for the government before they became loudmouth talk show hosts who make believe they bash the government. So let me give you some facts that you can deal with. What do all of these structures have in common? The Triborough Bridge in New York, the Lincoln Tunnel, LaGuardia Airport, Empire State Building, the overseas highway that linked the Florida Keys, the Tennessee Valley Authority, the Shasta Dam, Hoover Dam, the Golden Gate Bridge, the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge. What do they all have in common? Well, first of all, they're all what's known as infrastructure. You got that one? That's called infrastructure. How were they built? Well, you're going to learn about that on the Savage Nation, and you're going to learn what role the government had to play in it. And I'm going to tell you something about jobs in that era. The difference between Michael Savage and the others in the radio is that I grew up poor. My father actually worked on a government job, or he would have starved to death in the 1930s. He would have starved to death or probably had to turn to crime in order to survive, as did some of his poor friends. You don't know any of this. So what are you saying? The government's always bad? Was it not for vast government spending, he wouldn't have had the little job that got him started on the road to being a small businessman. And one of his best friends, who went on to owning bars and restaurants, a poor, tough kid from New York, got a job in the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC camps, which he told us about when we were little kids. The Civilian Conservation Corps was part of the New Deal, and the CCC employed 2 million men. 2 million men who worked on any job imaginable, construction, farming, you name it. They gave them an income, and it was filled with tough boys, mainly from the lowest echelons of society. And he told us about the fights they had in the camps. They weren't all blood brothers because they were mainly white. They fought with each other like animals for dominance. So let's put the racial issue out of it. What I'm trying to say to you is that infrastructure, government jobs are not necessarily a bad thing. The issue is who manages the government. The issue is how do you control the graft. The issue is keep the unions out of it. So I want you to understand that unless we had government spending, you wouldn't have had the Lincoln Tunnel, the LaGuardia Airport, the Triborough Bridge, Empire State Building, the George Washington Bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge, Shasta Dam, and so many other phenomenal feats of engineering. That's the story, my friends. The federal government played a big role in these projects. They were indispensable to most of these projects. And by the way, this included more than just the New Deal programs initiated in the 30s. The Bureau of Reclamation began planning in the 1920s for major dams and supervised their construction in the 1930s. President Hoover's Reconstruction Finance Corporation was a vehicle for financing projects under the following Roosevelt administration. Now, Roosevelt's socialist New Deal programs were crucial, in particular the PWA, the Public Works Administration, and the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, both controversial at their time of construction. And there was someone behind all of this. The PWA, the Public Works Administration, was the Socialist New Deal's premier agency for the construction of huge projects. And the administrator was a genius named Harold Ickes, I-C-K-E-S. Conservatives generally hate Harold Ickes. But I would ask all these conservatives, who would have built these roads and bridges and tunnels was it not for the government? You know, it's the same idiotic doctrinaire thinking that says, you know, those riots in Baltimore, those black kids ought to go out there and build a business. Those teens ought to go out there and start a business instead of rioting. Or go get a job. Well, there are no jobs. It's as simple as that. So there's an argument to be made on both sides of this discussion. And I, as the man in the independent circle, the man who actually carved out the independent conservative venue in talk radio, is here to drive the train right down the line. And I'll be right back.
Join the Savage Nation. Call now, 855-400-SAVAGE, 855-400-7282. Savage.
Your Savage Nation is sponsored by SwissAmerica.com. It's the only company I trust for tangible assets, gold and silver. Call 800-BUY-COIN. Okay, we know the train crash was not caused by an infrastructure failure, but by a probably stoner engineer. As I said, maybe even an attempted suicide by train. The fact is they should have drug tested him the minute they found him. But his lawyer already is between him and, he doesn't remember anything. You hear this? That unto itself is worrisome. Incidentally, the notoriously tight curve where the accident occurred is near the site of one of the deadliest train wrecks in U.S. history, which was the 1943 derailment of the Congressional Limited from Washington to New York, where 79 people were killed. So it's not the worst train wreck in history, but it's a big deal. And right away, left and right, doctrinaire positions. Left says we need more construction. Right says, no, we don't need anything. Well, my argument is a little different than both of them, which is the infrastructure of America is falling apart. The roads are a disgrace. I want you to, one of these days, if you come to San Francisco and you're coming in from SFO to San Francisco, it is the worst road in the United States of America. There is still not a highway from the San Francisco airport into the city. It's a wreck. It's broken. It goes through local streets. It's a disgrace. You go to Malaysia, they built a skyway above the streets. Now, part of the problem is the morons in the city who have these planning decisions that make no sense whatsoever. They have to preserve the slum, so they want to build a roadway over the slum. You hear? Idiots. Just morons. Again, doctrinaire planners won't let them build a skyway from the city to the airport. So there's a lot of problems in America with why we can't rebuild the infrastructure. Some of it is due to zoning restrictions. Some of it is to idiot planners. There are many, many issues here, but are worth discussing because our infrastructure is crumbling, falling apart. Is there anyone listening to the Savage Nation today who can tell me they've not been in a tunnel recently in a major city that's not leaking? Is there anyone who can listen to this show who knows anything about bridges? Not agree that they're falling apart? I happen to know steel workers on the Golden Gate Bridge who paint the bridge. It's a constant paint job. And they have told me that the rivets are constantly breaking on that bridge. The bridge is falling apart. It's rusting right in front of our eyes. It needs to be maintained constantly. The spools of wire that suspend the bridge are constantly being respooled. The bridge is old. It's weak. You have to understand there are realities to the infrastructure, and the realities are they get old just like we do. And again, I want to remind you that these phenomenal edifices that we look at, such as the Great Hoover Dam on the Colorado River, the Golden Gate Bridge, the San Francisco-Oakland Bridge, Lincoln Tunnel, Triborough Bridge, LaGuardia Airport, Empire State Building, were constructed in the 1930s. Again, the government, the federal government, played a major role in most of these projects. And I can spell this out for you if you need to, or you can look it up yourself. There was a Public Works Administration. There was a man running it named Harold Ickes, who the conservatives hated. They said he was a socialist. Well, I don't know what he was, but the man was a genius. The man not only created socially useful edifices like bridges and tunnels and dams, he provided millions of jobs. But the fact of the matter is he was a genius. He was a genius builder who the historian William Lochtenberg praised as a builder to rival Cheops, the Egyptian pharaoh whose tomb is the Great Pyramid. And so when you look at these great construction jobs in the United States of America, remember that there was a role for workers, they built it, and there was a role for the government who put the funding together, put the organization together, and the result was the infrastructure items that I'm talking about. And so that's why I think it's important that these somewhat